Mental health professionals of Reddit, what is the most disturbing case you have personally encountered? My mother is a child psychologist who specializes in severe abuse, God love her. She told me about the worst case she ever had. Her patient was a 13-year-old girl who had collaborated with her parents in the starvation and torture of her older sister, who eventually died weighing only 45 pounds. My mom told me a lot of the hideous details, which to this day, I truly wish she hadn't. My mom was seeing the girl in order to testify as an expert witness about whether or not she ought to be considered culpable and tried along with her parents. Unfortunately, I don't remember the outcome. All I can remember are the disturbing images and details of the torture. I used to work with adult survivors of child sexual abuse, and I still do, but no longer specifically just with that group. I've heard things, week in week out, that would bring a grown man to tears. I'll never unhear that stuff and for confidentiality reasons cannot discuss any stories on here. But I feel glad I witnessed their pain and they felt they could share their stories. I am a medical student and during our psych rotation, I talked to this male 40-year long-term resident with treatment-resistant schizophrenia in the facility. He seemed shy, soft-spoken and withdrawn, but I had to get a medical history from him anyway. The place where I interviewed him was an open area, where the door to the secure room is about 10 meters away from me. Anyway, I begin my interview and I asked him what brought him here. He said he was hearing voices of the devil. I asked him what the voices said, but I couldn't hear his mumbling reply. My stupid ass asked him to repeat like 3 times and he suddenly stood up and yelled, "I killed children, okay?" They asked me too, they as in the voices, which he thinks is the devil. He then takes his chair and tries to throw it on me while crying. I ran to the secure room and then he proceeded to hit himself in the head, over and over again against the secure room's glass window. Looked over his file and turns out he was a prolific child murderer in the local primary school. Poor guy, I think he was suicidal, and I sincerely hope new treatments can help him. Anyway, psychiatry is a no for me. I'm not a medical health professional, but I still have PTSD, anxiety and depression due to severe trauma, which I won't go into, but I decided to see a private counselor, and I started talking with her. But pretty much after our first session she referred me to the local NHS mental health services. I'm from the UK. I was really struggling to talk about what had happened to me, but it was like she knew it was beyond what she could help me with. But I got referred, and, well, after about 2 sessions with a mental health nurse absolutely everything came out. Up to that point I had tried so hard to keep everything in because I was terrified of talking to anyone about it. I don't even know how she managed it, but once it was out, although the police had to be involved because of the nature of what happened to me, it felt like I'd overcome such a huge hurdle. Sadly, I'd say 10 years down the line and I'm still struggling. Some days are better than others, but just being able to get it out was so huge for me. I would say more, but I don't want to freak anyone out, but I hope you don't mind me sharing. I've spent a lot of time in psych wards, and I've met some really scary cases. There was one girl who would only wear clothes that were Justin Bieber merchandise and had a cardboard cut out of him in her room that she talked to. She was pretty terrifying. One time, she went into the closet with a member of staff to get some soap and there was a horrible scream and then the member of staff ran out of the closet crying hysterically with her shirt almost ripped off. I'm not, but a friend is. They work primarily with PTSD victims. Well, one guy that's now passed was a veteran. Dude starts talking about this one raid. They were supposed to be taking a small market, expecting heavy resistance from local insurgents. What they didn't expect was a 13-year-old with a 7.62 rifle, 3 stories up. He killed 5 soldiers. The guy had to retreat. They lit the building up. Grenades, rockets, bullets. Everything. Now, they didn't actually know the person was a child yet. They thought it was an insurgent. Sniper fire stops and the real fight begins. They get jumped by a small group, maybe 25, 30 insurgents. Firefights take place. The soldiers get back up. Things turn into an outright brawl. And he's describing this story in graphic detail. Well, at the end of it all, the sniper kid turns up. Still breathing somehow. The guy had to put the kid down. After telling the story, he started freaking out. Total panic attack, PTSD flashback, the works. Pulls out a boot knife he had on him and starts screaming about the insurgents and how they are attacking them. Grabs my friend. Starts giving them orders and pass them the knife. Which, as soon as it was in my friend's hands, immediately got dropped. And this guy flipped out talking about how he is really an insurgent sent to kill him. Thankfully, a few other of the doctors there heard it all and restrained him enough to calm him down. Apparently, it happened frequently enough. But he's never seen a patient describe something so horrific, yet stay so calm and reserved. But the thing that freaked me out was, he was saying how the guy sounded like he enjoyed it. Aside from the boy. Not a medical person, or mental health person, but yesterday, I was walking around my neighborhood, and right in front of me, a poor 5-year-old got run over on accident by his mom. Dad and young sister of the kid were right there. Worst part is, the kid wasn't dead. I could tell he was in so much pain. Blood everywhere. I'm never going to be able to forget that. Probably have mild PTSD. Male 24, severe disorganized schizophrenia. His conservatorship was terminated after a long period of 100% medication compliance and solid improvement in symptoms. This meant he was no longer legally required to take his meds, strictly speaking, and didn't have as much professional support. Besides the fact that he became incapable of feeling pain or sensing changes in temperature, which is really freaking weird to see, trust me, he started isolating in his home, spending time with all the characters he hallucinated. Sonic the Hedgehog, Link from Botwu, the entire cast of the 1987 film The Lost Boys, etc. Literally, he'd only sleep 3 to 4 hours a day max and spend the rest of the day in a dark room alone, surrounded by piss bottles and rotten food and buckets full of his own shit, and imagining that he was interacting with any number of fictional characters. To him they were as real as you or me. Source: I was his case manager when he was aged 18 to 23 through an agency working with youth, who were in foster care on their 18th birthday, helping them adjust to life as adults. He was the first case assigned to me when I started working in the field, and I had a great relationship with him. At one point I considered him one of my success stories. I wish they never unconserved him. I still think about him and wonder where he is today. I'm in grad school to be a therapist, so I don't really have any personal stories. However, my trauma counseling professor told the class about a patient he had, who was kidnapped and tortured by a satanic cult when he was a kid. He came to my professor for therapy as an adult because the torture, which was mostly sexual, as I understand, had resulted in him developing PTSD, which was interfering with his sex life with his wife. It was a really sad and disturbing case to hear about. We had a patient admitted at the hospital. Had schizophrenia. Apparently, he built a guillotine and chopped off his arm with it, then later jumped into the bay and was found hypothermic near death. He had hell tattooed all over his face and would just constantly pace inside the room and growl. One of the reasons why we have nicknamed our medical care unit to mental care unit. Back in my training days, I sat in with a support group of people who all shared homicidal thoughts. I heard stories of moms who wanted to drown their babies in the bathroom sink, teenagers outlining how they would shoot up their school or murder and torture their parents. Going into detail about that sort of thing isn't allowed, so those individuals were shut down pretty fast, and lots of stories about men wanting to murder their wives. I even had one individual talking of how good it would feel to kill their gay nephew. I'm a gay man myself, by the way, so that was interesting to hear. Former EMT. Went to the ER to transfer a patient to an inpatient psychiatric hospital about an hour away. My patient was a sweet 7-year-old little boy, small for his age, seemed happy as could be. Read through the chart and talked to his family to see why a 7-year-old was being committed. He was attacking his older siblings, parents, teachers at school, anything he could get his hands on. Kid had been repeatedly caught torturing the neighbor's cat and setting fires around the house and laughing about all of it. Mom cried the whole ride up, Dad didn't say a word, and the little boy just carried on looking like a happy little kid on a road trip, playing with his SpongeBob plush. I still remember the kid's name and I wouldn't be surprised if I see him in the news for something awful down the line. There was nothing disturbing about the encounter itself, but the circumstances surrounding it really stuck with me. Many years ago, I met a kindergartner whose parents had brought him to the psych emergency room I worked in at the time. His teacher had called them because the child seemed to be responding to internal stimuli, so they came right to us that evening. This beautiful child, with dark smudges under his eyes from not sleeping, told me that the voices were telling him to cut his ears and nose off with his little safety scissors. He earnestly told me that his teacher had told the class that we only cut paper with our scissors, and that's what he used to try and keep the voice at bay. I staffed the case with the doctor on call, and of course, the kid was to be admitted. Meanwhile, some jackass pulled the fire alarm. I go outside to talk to parents, who are smiling and watching their little boy, exploring the fire engine with a couple of firefighters. I knew that this was going to be the very last moment of their before. I cried like a baby over that one. Not so much a case, but I had worked at a mental health inpatient facility, where we took in short-term suicidal patients for about a week's stay. Most of our patients were self-harmers and we had to allow them to do it to an extent which was really hard. Sitting in the room next to them knowing what they were doing, I really hated this part of the job, and while working there, we get this woman Emma. I really enjoyed her because she was no nonsense and said it was how it was. Emma was self-harming one night and I come in to check on her to bring her first aid supplies, and she tells me how the self-harm and anorexia started because she was raped by an uncle from 5 to 17 and then a boyfriend 17 to 22, and she ended up at our facility because she found out the uncle had ended up having 2 daughters and she just broke it that knowing the fate of those girls. I said, "We can report it," and she told me about telling previous teachers and group home workers that never believed her due to a personality disorder. After talking for a while, she felt confident enough to do the reporting. So, during her stay, we had the police come in and chat with her, which led to the uncle getting arrested. After the police left, I had worked out a plan for Emma to get help for her PTSD with a great therapist, and had found an eating disorder clinic specifically for those who suffered from sexual abuse. When I walked her through the plan, she cried. She said that she couldn't believe I took the eating disorder seriously and that the eating disorder was what hindered her for so long, because it made it hard to sleep and work and hold relationships, which further impacted the complex PTSD and personality disorder. Emma is now an advocate for those who experienced family sexual abuse. After that, I went home that day and cried like I could not stop crying, and it really put me in a bad place for quite a while, thinking that on one hand the system had failed Emma at so many stops and that people could hurt other people, specifically children, this way. I was naive at the time, freshly qualified, thinking I can help everyone, but actually working with someone who experienced this type of crime really rocked me. It did, however, solidify my purpose that I will do what I can to advocate for mental health support for all. I worked in a residential setting for people with traumatic brain injuries when I was 17. I took a 34-year-old male to the grocery store. Before getting out of the car, he grabbed my arm and told me that if I don't have sex with him, he would kill himself. I told him that I would not be having sex with him and that I would be contacting my supervisor. As I called her, he got out of the car and began running towards the freeway. I got out and ran after him, telling her briefly what happened and asking for help. The response? "I'm grocery shopping. Figure it out." I talked him off the ledge, but it took 45 minutes. I used every verbal de-escalation technique I knew. She showed up nearly an hour and a half after I called, kids in tow. I quit that day. Too many horrors to count. Sure, there's some that catch you off guard and hit you hard out of left field, but that's not the hard part that breaks us. It's the hopelessness of it all, when you realize the country would rather demonize, marginalize, and pretend that people hurting don't exist rather than face that our societal dysfunction helps create so many abused kids who turn into abusers. There's no support for mental health workers from up high. There's laughably little money in it for how much comparative education and experience you need to keep people alive and safe, and there's not a lot of wins where you see people get better. You can keep people safe, but the most disturbing thing we personally encounter is how rare it is to see lasting improvement, kids or otherwise, if the cyclical abuse was bad enough in their childhoods.